Hi, everyone. My name is Parker Gaunt, and I'm happy to be in this discussion board this week talking about Marbury v. Madison, which is the case that shaped judicial review and essentially gave the Supreme Court power. So let's get right into it. So we need to talk about government prior to the case. So before Marbury v. Madison, the role of the Supreme Court was a lot less defined than it is today. The Constitution had established the judicial branch, but it didn't really explicitly state that courts could strike down laws that violated the Constitution, which was, in my opinion, an oversight. But Congress and the president often had the final say on constitutional questions, and there wasn't really a clear mechanism for the courts to serve as the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution. So, kind of as a result of this, federal government lacked a really important check on legislative and executive authority. You essentially had executive and legislative checking each other. So now let's talk about the actual case itself, Marbury v. Madison. So it began when William Marbury sued Secretary of State James Madison after Marbury's judicial commission was not delivered. So the Chief Justice at the time was John Marshall. He had a kind of a really difficult situation he was in because, if he were to order that commission to be delivered, it really would have led to a confrontation between, the President Thomas Jefferson's administration at the time. But he still issued, a groundbreaking decision. And he ruled that Marbury was entitled to his commission, and he also found that the law giving the court authority to issue the order was unconstitutional. So this was really the first time the Supreme Court declared an act of Congress unconstitutional, and it established the principles of judicial review. Those are the two words I will always remember from AP U.S. history: judicial review. It really strengthened the judiciary, and it clarified the role that it had within the federal government. So now, impacts from the case. So the impacts of Marbury v. Madison, we kind of talked about it already, but it can still be seen in modern society. Judicial review really allows courts to evaluate laws, executive actions, government policies, and ensure that they're complying with the Constitution, right? So there have been many major Supreme Court cases that involve civil rights, voting rights, freedom of speech, criminal justice. All of those have relied on the authority that was established in Marbury v. Madison. Because of this case, Americans have an independent judicial branch that can protect constitutional rights and prevent government overreach. So it still is one of the foundations of the system of checks and balances that we have in our system. I think a lot of people would be interested to know about that, because I think a lot of people just assume that this checks and balances was in mind when the founders were establishing the Constitution, but really it can be seen that the court itself established that. So now let's talk about the Supreme Court today. Judicial review is an essential part of American government. Some people today believe that process needs to be updated, especially for the modern era. So there are several ways that you could change that. You could increase transparency in Supreme Court decision making, and require more detailed explanations when you're overturning major laws or government actions. The big one that we always hear about is term limits for Supreme Court justices, which would help the court kind of reflect current day values and modern day values. You maintain judicial review as a core constitutional function. You're entitled to your opinion on how you feel, what you feel is the correct way to go on that. I think the Supreme Court definitely has become a lot more partisan in today's age. If you look at the favorability ratings, I'm a political science nerd, so you look at the favorability ratings of the Supreme Court today, it's not very great. So, interestingly though, 9 out of 10 Supreme Court cases are unanimous in their decisions. It's those ones where it's 5-4, 6-3. Those ones that are really the ones that get the highlights. So in conclusion, Marbury v. Madison transformed the role of the Supreme Court. It helped establish the balance of power that exists in government today, and the judiciary's authority was uncertain before the case, but establishing judicial review really allowed the courts to determine what's constitutional, what's not, and that's can be seen today, especially with the current president administration, it seems like going to the Supreme Court every 2 weeks for something that they did. It's one of the most influential Supreme Court cases in history. So thank you for listening, everyone, and have a great week.